Hey everybody, this is Unit 4, Video 4, and we're going to be working on writing equations of trig functions. This is the first video on writing equations, and we're going to be working with sine and cosine for these examples. So the first thing we're going to do for these two examples is we're going to write the equation based off the information that we see in the picture. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a chance, if you want to pause the video, to sketch these in your notebook so that you have a reference later. So go ahead and pause it and come back when you're done. Alright, so if you've got number 1 sketched in your notebook, we're going to go ahead and write down a few notes, and then we're going to be able to write the equation of this. Just by sight, I should see that this is going to be a sine graph, so that is going to go into my notes. I'm also noticing that it has been shifted up. I can see that what used to be on 0, 0 is now up at 2. So I know it has a vertical translation of up 2. I also see that it doesn't just have a height of 1, so it doesn't just go from 2 to 3, but it actually goes from 2 to 4, which means that my amplitude has changed. So I'm observing that, and I'm going to say, oh, my amplitude is 2 because of the spread between the zeros and then up to as far as 2, and then on this one it goes down at 2 spaces as well. Okay, so I notice that it's not really moving left or right at all, so I don't have to worry about a phase shift for this particular graph, but I do notice that it finishes an entire cycle in pi. And if it's finishing all the way into pi and doesn't need to go any further, then I actually have a period change. And my period, if I was able to finish in pi, so what happened to that? How did I stretch? Did I compress? And it's probably that my period is pi. And I can figure this out by setting that to 2 pi divided by b. And I can go ahead and solve for b by using some cross multiplication. And you'll notice that your b value here is going to be 2. So my b equals 2. Okay, so with that, I can go ahead and start to write the equation based on all my information. So I'm going to start with f of x equals, my amp is 2, so that takes care of this part. And I've got my sine. My v value is 2, so I've put in my b value. I'm also taking care of the fact that this moved up, so I've got x and then up 2 spaces as well. And that should take care of everything for this particular graph. All right, moving on to the second one, we're also going to take some notes here. So I'm going to start by saying, all right, well, this is probably a cosine curve that's being pictured. So I know I've got my cosine. I don't know, it looks kind of like it was moved down as well. So this was moved down 2 spaces. And I noticed that because these would have been on 0, but they're down at -2. So this was, it looks like a vertical translation of 2 down. I also can see that I have a phase shift here because it went left. So it went left pi over 2. Left pi over 2. And it takes from negative pi over 2 to 3 pi over 2. And that's actually still a period of 2 pi. So that means my period did not change, so no period change. Okay, so I've got my vertical stuff. Oh, there's one more thing. A normal cosine curve looks like this, but this one is exactly the opposite, where it goes this way, which means that I actually have a reflection, and that's something that many students leave off, so please make sure you note it. So when you go to write this graph, I'm going to go ahead and put in my -1. I didn't know, hey, did I have an amp change? And I actually do not have an amp change because the space between my horizontal, my 0 spots, and up and down is actually only 1. So I did not have an amp change. So I have the cosine, no period change. And I'm going to then have x minus pi over 2, oops, plus pi over 2 because we went left, and then we went down 2. So this is my equation for this particular graph. Okay, another way to do this is actually just being given some information and then writing your equation based on that information. Now there's lots of other things, but the idea is to make as minimum number of transformations to your equation as possible. So if you don't see anything noted that should change something, don't change it on your own. In other words, perhaps there is a vertical change to this first example. Maybe there's even a horizontal change, but the only thing I can see is that it's a sine function with a period of 4 pi. So I'm only going to change those things. So the first thing I do with my period is I have to figure out if I have what my b value is. So I'm going to take the 4 pi and I'm going to set it equal to 2 pi over b. And I'm going to solve. And I end up here with my b value being 1/2. If you're not sure how to do that, cross multiply. So before you comment, how do you do that? Cross multiply right here and find that your b is going to be 1/2. So if that's the only thing I know, then that's the only thing I need to put into my new equation. So I have f of x equals the sine of 1/2 x, and that's all that's changed. Okay, so look at number 4. So I know it's going to be a cosine function, and I also know that there's a phase shift of pi over 2 to the right. There could be plenty of other things that happen to this graph, but I'm going to write the minimum that I have to. And so this is going to give me f of x equals, I know it's cosine, and if I have a phase shift, that goes inside of my parentheses. So I'm going to have x minus pi over 2, because subtraction means to the right. And that's all I can write based on this bit of information. Let's go on to the next one. For this particular one, number 5, I'm given that it's a cosine function, and this is a bit of different information. I'm given the range here. And what's important about the range is that I can actually determine what my amplitude is, and I can also figure out what my vertical translation, if any, is. On this first graph, I notice that the highest point I have is positive 3, and the lowest point I have is negative 3, which means my middle is still 0. And if my middle is still 0, then there was no vertical translation. However, if this is going all the way up to positive 3 and all the way down to negative 3, then I have an amp of 3. Please note, I do not have a vertical transformation here. So if I'm going to write my function as simply as possible, I'm just writing 3 cosine of x. No need for anything else. And on this last one here, number 6, I have a sine function. And I also see that I have a range from 0 to 2. So again, I'm going to go ahead and mark that it goes from 0 to positive 2. So for this one, clearly we moved up because I'm no longer with 0 right in the middle of everything. In fact, the middle is 1. And if the middle is 1, then that makes my vertical translation up 1. If my middle was somewhere else, for example, if my middle was I was working with was here at negative 3, then that would have been down 3. So you really have to pay attention as to where that middle line would be, kind of like a mid, not a midpoint, but a mid-range. Mid-range, let's use that. Probably not so technical, but the mid-range is up 1 in this case. So back to this picture here, we also see that the difference between that middle range that we found and the top and the bottom, the max and the min, is only 1, which means there was no amp change whatsoever. So all we're worried about here is that the sine function went up 1. So all I can write is f of x equals the sine of x and plus 1, and that gives me my vertical shift. So when we're in class the next time, we're going to take a couple of these and we're going to combine them, and we're going to have quite a bit of information given. And sometimes our information is going to be a little more obvious, and sometimes it's going to be a little more challenging for us to figure out. So be comfortable with the 6 examples that I've done here and be ready to go in class as we make these a little more challenging for ourselves.